Let's create the rule types for the state rule and its corresponding closing rule. So we go to rule types. I'm going to click on the plus, and my first rule type that I'm going to create now will be the main rule type, and it's going to be the high temp rule type. When a rule of this type fires, an event of this type will fire, and the event will be of type high temp event type. It is a state rule, and I'm going to build the rule type with the same prefix when, and this time I'll pick asset types to pick from, and the asset type that owns the attribute that I care about is tank. The tank has the temperature attribute, so I'm going to pick tank, and I'm going to start building the rest of the rule type with the relationship which links the rule type to the attribute. Now, if I click on select attribute, I'll give a I'll get a choice of attributes that I can build a rule type around. Temperature is the one I care about. That was the only attribute that I assigned to tank. The attribute label might be something a little more human readable than the actual attribute name. Maybe the attribute name has underscores in it or something like that. So I'm going to just say temperature with a capital T. Doesn't really matter. I could leave that empty, and this would be used in the um, will appear to the user that's building the actual rule. The data type of the attribute is a number. The greater than label, if I leave this alone, then the words would be greater than, but maybe I want to use a different word to represent the relationship greater than, and I'm going to use the word over. Now, this rule type could be used for other uh, relationships between the attribute and some threshold, less than, equal, not equal, and so on and so forth. But over is what I'm going to use. I'm going to leave the value alone because the value is actually going to be set by the user when the user creates the rule. The units, I'm going to say Celsius. Again, doesn't really matter. It just might make the reading of the rule easier for the user that's going to create the rule. I'm going to leave the duration alone. And if I wanted to, I could make a more complex rule type using these conditional operators and chaining clauses together. I'm not going to do that. I'll just go ahead and create this rule type. So I've got the high temp rule type. Now you'll recall that there was going to be a closing rule, and the closing rule needs its rule type. So let's go ahead and create that. And once again, I'll mention this may seem like a lot of work, but it's all going to make the life of the user who creates the actual rule simpler. The closing rule, I'm going to call I'm actually going to call it the not high temp rule type, just to make it very almost silly, make it very easy to understand. Um, the event that will be generated when a rule of this type fires will be the not high temp event type that we had created earlier. And it's a state rule when asset types tank, the attribute is temperature, and uh, the relationship to the threshold will be less than or equal to. So I'm going to use the word below to represent less than or equal to. Now, here's something interesting to note. The threshold for the high temp rule firing and the threshold for the closing rule firing, they don't have to be the same. So maybe you want the high temp rule to fire when the temperature exceeds 40 Celsius. But then maybe you don't want that event that's generated to actually be closed unless the temperature falls below the 40, but maybe even lower. Maybe it has to fall all the way below 30 before the event generated for the high temp rule is closed. Once again, the value doesn't have to be set here. The threshold will get set by the user when they create the actual rule. And the units are again going to be Celsius, no duration, no other pieces to this rule type. Let me go ahead and hit create. And now I've got a rule type for the main rule and a rule type for the corresponding closing rule.